Tastes like a lost job.
Tastes like a lost job. You fired. You fired. That's not how he does it, right?
You fired.
You fired. You fired. Evidently there we go. We're back into our regular setting. We popped into the time temple for a second there, but we popped back. This is where,
as one does.
As one does, we go back and forth. Welcome back to Geeklife City. That's what I'm calling our background.
Bound by the laws of physics and nature.
No, not at all. Why would we? Speaking of not being bound by the laws of physics and nature, here's something that's completely unrelated to that. It's Valentine's Day, and love is in the air. As with every holiday in the apocalypse, this is definitely being celebrated a bit differently. One thing is for certain, though. We have definitely grown more romantic with the content we consume, right? Well, this romance has gotten even more hot and heavy during the pandemic. We have to wonder, is this relationship toxic? In fact, our media romanticizes a lot. And tonight we're going to talk about whether or not that is a good, or cue the Lady Gaga music, bad romance.
Good Gaga.
Let's start with our biggest trope, the biggest trope of all, love as a test of character. It feels like the media loves to twist and make it look like a flurry, make love look like a fury of overwhelming passion. People instantly fall in love, skip a couple of bases, let emotions fly, and have the best or worst 2 weeks of their life in a relationship. And this is how relationships are typically pictured on screen, which is rather unrealistic. It's completely unrealistic if you compare it to the expectations that they set in 500 Days of Summer, or even Kylo Ren sacrificing himself. Why is putting each other's love to the test such a thing in pop culture, Jake?
Yeah, no, it's definitely like a reoccurring trope that always happens. And it's whenever we were talking about like bad romances and in pop culture and everything, that was one of the first things I thought of, is because I've been in a pretty solid relationship for about 10 years. And so it's one of those where it's not just something new. And we've never really tested each other. There's some people you'll see in pop culture or in movies or something. It's always I have to act insanely crazy to see if this is the one, and it sets this crazy tone where people just think they have to constantly be testing their partner to see if they're the right one. And it's just did you ever think that was maybe a dick move? Right. And that by testing your partner, you're literally just pushing them further away. Why would you be doing some crazy shit like that?
You don't have to go through and match up on every single part of that checklist on the first date, especially.
No, exactly.
And 50 First Dates, I feel like, is a movie about making dates where you hit every single part of the checklist on day one. You know,
I think he had to. That was that was a special one.
Plot.
I like how 500 Days of Summer though, because that movie is probably one of the a great example of how people choose to romanticize romance, and then at the end of it, she's like, were they good days? And he's just yeah, no, they're fucking great. And then then he actually has to think about it. And then he's like, oh yeah, no, we argued a lot. And so I think that's a great one. And then because it just kind of puts into perspective that it's not all just sunshine and rainbows, right? But then that whole thing is about putting just your relationship to the test in general.
Right
Which is let the world do that. The world's gonna put it, and then shit
Life's
will put
it enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to test your relationship. The world will do that for you.
Do it for you.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't need to compete with the shit that the world puts in there.
Yeah.
Pandemic.
Right.
Exactly.
Kev, why are couples always testing each other in pop culture? And what does it say about real world relationships? Are we constantly putting each other to the test?
Well, Dad, we're getting these examples from probably the worst place to get relationship advice or examples from, Hollywood. So I think that's where some of that stuff sort of resonates or kind of trickles down into. And I think, we kind of get set up, right? Where this idea of how relationships are supposed to be, as Jake mentioned, is that, oh yeah, I got to test to make sure this relationship works to see if I'm really in love with this person. No, you don't. That doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to be this fleeting sensation of an exploding firework in the sky. It's supposed to be boring sometimes, but but at the end of the day, you're supposed to feel safe. but that doesn't make for a good Hollywood story.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
these sort of testing of relationships and things of that nature kind of gives us a reason to invest into characters. It's something outside of our norm. Unfortunately, we try to adapt that into our actual life, life imitating fiction, not the other way around. And it also creates more dilemmas and gives like characters more implications for themselves, their own story arcs, right? Like it'll give you a reason to feel bad for a villain. Because they'll have means to justify the ends for an antagonist or an opportunity for an ultimate sacrifice for the protagonist, right? Like you need to have that extra variable that kind of gives the characters another challenge, I guess. And for some reason, we try to see that in our own selves, right? It's like, yes, we already have a fucking 9 to 5 job that we probably don't enjoy, and now here's this other angle of like something that's always like picking me into like my side or whatever. And that's like we try to correlate these things, I guess, and that kind of expresses itself into an art medium of like movies and television.
Right. No, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think the real reason we see it so much is because we're taking it from the worst examples, which is Hollywood. I think that epitomizes everything there.
Drama. It's the
Right?
drama. I think people, they want the drama of like, kind of like putting each other to the test or something like that, and it's like, it's like you said, people don't realize like, because movies, the whatever, I don't even know how many hours me and Jessica dumped into binge watching Demon Slayer. That doesn't make for good TV. You know what I mean? But like we had a great time.
Right.
And so like,
relationship looks like.
Exactly. And that's what a large majority of it looks like. That and eating at restaurants whenever the pandemic's not around. Or eating in general. I think that's why everybody puts on weight in relationships, is because like you just
really doing a lot of it's really progressively doing more of the things that you would do by yourself, and like the more intimate you become, the more you check off that list, right? It's like, okay, now we just eat in front of this person. Well, now we come in front of this person. Well, now we're really intimate, and I can shit with the door open.
It's not leave these like latitudinal, longitudinal coordinates on a piece of paper and disappear and say, I hope he finds me or she finds me. Like what?
Right.
That's not romance. That's just adventuring, or that's just navigating the world. Anyway.
Yeah. and it's also like, as Jake said in the first point, like the life will test it enough. You don't need to go be the one stress test in relationships. So,
Exactly.
That's one thing I would say about that. Another big trope though that you see in media though is love and almost mental disorders as a way. Love and abuse as a huge part of it. We see relationships in media and pop culture that are often put on a pedestal, but should they be? There are tons of highly romanticized but highly toxic relationships in media. The biggest and most obvious example is the legendary Harley Quinn. It's not too uncommon to hear some tool on the internet saying, she's the Harley to my Joker. But what does that even mean? Is your relationship based in Stockholm Syndrome and abuse? Like, I mean, what the fuck is that supposed to mean in the first place? If you know anything about comics, you wouldn't compare your relationship to Harley Quinn and the Joker. Jake, can you think of any other examples?
I always think of like people who think of Gatsby and Daisy. That's a big one, or whatever from The Great Gatsby. Like they always put like Gatsby as like look at this, they were super romantic, or even dude, I had another one and now I'm drawing a blank. But like there's so many of these like big relationships where the guy was either cheating on somebody or is actually going to murder her real husband. Or like there's always like some kind of craziness going on, and there's just tons of examples in media where they essentially like turn these toxic relationships into somehow like everybody's favorite one, like the Harley and Joker. That always kind of gets called, especially with super cringy couples where they're essentially like talking about being each other's Harley and Joker, and it's like, yeah, so you're in abusive relationships, what you're saying. Because the Joker doesn't like actually love Harley. I don't think he ever really has, and I think they do a good job, even in the animated series, of showing that, like that, Joker, she was always just kind of written to be just a side character to Joker, and that's how he treats her. And so
Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet's another one too, man. People, you know, like that one's been used through Taylor Swift songs all throughout history. And it's just like, bro, that's a fucking like double like suicide or something, right? Like that's
super toxic relationship. They weren't star-crossed lovers. They had mental health issues.
Yeah, like they needed to go see therapists.
Yes,
like, not each other.
Yeah. Right. Apologize. The snow is coming in heavily. Also, I've just been notified that there may be blackouts in my area for periodically for 15 minutes. In which case, see you when I see you guys.
What God is not telling you is that he's been sworn to secrecy because he's currently under an invasion from an unknown alien entity.
That periodically checks in here about every 15 minutes, and which is why I have to shut off all the power, including the one to the street.
They're siphoning his electricity. So.
And I only told you, this audience on Twitch, because I know you'll keep it a secret.
Right. Exactly.
Kev, this one's coming back to you. What makes on-screen relationships healthy, and should they be? Do they have to be?
For great storytelling, unfortunately, they don't have to be. They should be, but you know, like I said, great relationships look boring sometimes in reality, but you know, they're great because you know you feel safe and secure and you have a good person that's going to be by your side. But you know, just check a couple boxes. One, they need to be healthy and consensual. That's very important. Two, they should be realistic. Like, for examples, we have to stop with this angle of, you know, the relentless pursuit of women as being romantic. That's a trope that never works and is really dangerous.
Yeah, it's dangerous to encourage.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't work, guys. She doesn't want you. She doesn't want you. That's it. It's okay. Move on. And inclusion and representation, I think that also needs to be sort of displayed more. I think showing that there's more than just heterosexual relationships is important, right? Because how do we normalize anything? You make it normal. So yeah.
I mean, I've said it before, but I mean, seeing a lot of relationships on screen and seeing that, like Constantine and Jared Harkness, and seeing how bisexuality can be represented in such a masculine way helped me come to terms with that with myself. So showing those in healthy relationships would definitely be good. You know, one of the things that you frequently see is with almost any queer character is queer characters based in queer trauma. And so like, you know, like, you know, to go on a tangent, one of the things that was really wasn't based in trauma, and showed, you know, a unique form of representation in that way. But anyways, I'm getting too far off of a tangent. You know, I think that those are quality characteristics for a healthy on-screen relationship. I would agree with that one.
David in general was just a great example of, like, you know, just like as far as like if you're like, even Jessica's dad, this like old dude from Alabama, was watching Schitt's Creek and was like, I like this David guy, you know, and it's always like, there you go, man, you gotta like, you know, dip the toes in.
That's how you get them out there.
Yeah.
But Jake, I wanted to see what you thought about this though. What does an on-screen relationship have to be healthy?
I mean, obviously not like to sell tickets, right?
Right.
You know, I think like, you know, some of the biggest watched shows, even on Netflix, if you think about it, the show You, like, you know, is about like essentially a serial killer who goes around and stalks women. And then like, you know, when he does finally like approach them, or they approach him, you know, he like knows so much about them because he's literally been stalking them, you know, like, and so but that show was one of the most watched shows, you know, and so there's like so many like examples of like terrible relationships in television and movies and everything. And like, we all go through bad relationships, you know, and then we all go through good ones, but like TV just definitely puts magnifying glasses on the good and the bad, I think, you know, in relationships, and kind of like, you know, blows it up and makes you think that that's the reality, whenever that's actually just such a small sliver of the reality. reality, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, that's one of the biggest things. I lost my train of thought again. What was the main question?
Do on-screen relationships have to be healthy?
Yeah, no, they don't have to be healthy, but it's good to see healthy ones. I think is the
Right.
the big thing is like, they don't have to be healthy. Obviously not. There's a lot of very big shows that don't have healthy ones, but when they
Yeah.
are, it's kind of refreshing sometimes. To
Yeah.
see like a good relationship and be like, especially like if you're in a good relationship yourself, which
Right.
you can be like, dude, that's like a reflection of like us and our funness and our quirkiness, right? Like, and so
Right.
Yeah.
like there's the dude who did Regular Show did a animated series for HBO called Close Enough. And it's
Mhm.
basically about like, it's the same dude from Regular Show, so it's very Regular Show-esque, right? Every
Right.
episode starts off normal and gets fucking nuts. And so but it's about a couple and their kid, and they're like a millennial couple. And they go through a lot of like normal couple shit that turns into Regular Show like shit, right?
Yeah.
But like the show is still like very much like normal couple stuff that gets kind of blown out into proportion, right? And so
Yeah.
it was really reassuring though to see this like this mess of 30-year-olds essentially try to figure out like how to raise this super smart child and everything like that. And it's just like it's reflective of a real relationship, and so it was refreshing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't a toxic one. They love each other, they support each other, like all that good stuff. And like I think seeing that on screen it's good for people. And
What was
it's
the name of that show again?
Close Enough. It's on HBO Max. It's pretty good. It's
Yeah,
made
I
by
think
the
I've been
same.
looking for that one for a second. I want to write that down. Anyways, moving right along, because we got a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
While the toxic romanticization of characters shows itself most apparent in on-screen relationships, there are plenty of romanticizing that happens to characters that's completely independent of relationships, right? BoJack is a highly beloved character who 100% romanticizes depression and alcoholism. Similar things can be said about Rick from Rick and Morty. There are plenty of critics who claim video games and modern media romanticize violence and kind of being a shitty person in general. Jake, how does this kind of romanticization different, and is it more or less toxic?
Oh, I mean, if it's more or less toxic, it's a tough one. I think it's a little bit like it's not too much different though, than the actual like romanticization of like bad toxic traits of love, because I think love could be looked at as or the obsession that love can bring can be looked at as a drug just as much as alcohol or anything like that. But I think like the biggest thing is when people see these shitty traits in these characters and they automatically think like, oh shit, that's like me. And it's like, dude, no, man. Like Rick Sanchez, or, like Rick's an alcoholic and BoJack is an addict and everything and depressed and all this stuff. And it's to show you that like, even though BoJack has everything, his happiness is still something that he needed to find. It wasn't going to be anything that he took, anything that he did, any acting job that he got, and so like that was kind of like one of the stories you're supposed to take away from it. Not that it's okay to be a belligerent asshole, like so like but people, and we talked about that before because we had the Island of Misfit content deep dive that we did, is just that when characters are kind of left up to a person's interpretation too much sometimes, people will put and or pull and reflect on the things that they consider to be like the traits that they like hold the dearest to them, and sometimes that's the shitty traits, and it's just like they completely miss the point of that character.
100%. Sometimes it feels like trying to show a character's flaws, it does more than just humanize them. Sometimes it legitimizes their flaws to others that have them. Kev, do you think this is just viewers misunderstanding content, or writers showing too much good with the bad?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I think it's the writers trying to show that things aren't always black and white outside of like the obvious terrible, crimes against humanity. And that everyone is human and flawed adds to more complexity and philosophical conundrums, especially when writing story plots, right? Like in acting, when you're playing a villain, you have to believe yourself to be the good guy. It's how you sell that character. It gives your character more nuance. It makes people kind of question, right? They know you're doing some terrible shit, but at the same time, they're like, damn, I understand why they're doing it. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but it gives a point of view of where these sort of terrible acts come from, what place they're coming from, what created this character, what, that. And I think that's the point, right? The writers aren't trying to, I'm assuming that they're not trying to write a character and say, oh, it's okay to be this shitty person if this happens to you. I think they're literally just saying, no, this is how this person ended up at this point in their life.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and people, like Jake was saying, people take that as an excuse to enable themselves to, continue on with any sort of toxic behavior or habits that they may have. And I think that's the dangerous there, right? That's where you start dangerously romanticizing things that you shouldn't be, as opposed to looking at it as a life lesson or lessons learned. Because in the end, those characters never win and they never obtain any sort of peace or justification for what they want.
Oh yeah.
It's just a sort of reason behind why they act the way that they act, as opposed to just being like lizard brain where they're just reacting off instincts.
Right.
And good intentions never justify actions, but in fiction they make for great storytelling.
That's true. That's very true.
That's why I
Very
always
true.
love the Rick and Morty episode where Rick has the secret toilet, and the guy uses it or
Oh,
whatever,
yeah, the king of
and he's
shit.
like, yeah, the king of shit. And when the guy dies and he goes and sits on the toilet at the very end, and all the stuff pulls up and it's like, oh, look at you, you're the king of shit, and it's all flipping him off and everything like that's going on or whatever. And it's Rick's sad, there's sadness there, and it's because literally, and he's even got the pop for it. Nice, Don.
Yeah.
But it's there's the reason he's sad is because he's just like that was his friend. He didn't want to admit it, but he had made a friend in that kind of enemy. You know what I mean? And it's just because he's empty. And instead of looking at that, and thinking oh shit, Rick's an empty person. This guy is not he's not somebody I should look up to or hold to such a high I want to be like that guy. People do. Right. They go oh, but he's a genius that made all this other shit, and it's but Dan Harmon didn't write him to be your hero.
No, right.
But that's how people just take it though.
That's what I was thinking about the whole, content of whether or not all relationships have to be healthy. I don't think they have to be healthy, but you have to show why those are bad if you're trying to be responsible with the content.
Yeah.
If you're irresponsible with the content, then you're going to heroicize people like Rick or BoJack.
Joe.
And honestly, in all of the examples that were showed here, we've talked about here, they do show a lot of cons to that depressive side. They do try to show it in a very realistic sense. Yeah. And in that regard, that does add to the content, in my opinion, versus taking away from it.
Like Joe from You, no consequences for any of his actions, just being completely rewarded at every corner. What?
Right.
What? Not to give any spoilers away, but yeah.
It's always bizarre whenever it just they just have the super toxic character and everything works out for them. I'm always I'm waiting for shit to hit the fan, because I a lot of my favorite stuff, and Rick and Morty's one of them. I just think people overlook it, is that the shitty people usually get their just desserts. Rick,
they do.
Is never when he's a shitty person, it never leads to his happiness, right? When he, and so it's just one of those where I think Dan does, and I say Dan because we're close friends. Dan Harmon does a great job of showing the good with the bad, right? But then some people they don't. They just want to show here's the bad and it's good, and it's just no, come on, man. When you I think we were talking about it earlier. Actions have consequences. And so it's good to show those consequences on screen. So even if you're going to be shitty in a relationship, they should show the consequences of being shitty in said relationship.
I agree. And this isn't something that's just stuck to TV or Twitch or anything. It's in music too. There's no shortage of songs that glorify threatening overtones, all the way from Baby It's Cold Outside, which is a song I used to like until you think about it, until you listen to it, I feel like it's one of those things with 2020 vision, but I think it got canceled a lot further than 2020. Anyways. But it sounds super creepy. Every Breath You Take is another one. Blame It on the Alcohol. Of course, there's Robin Thicke's literal anthem, Blurred Lines. Emo is particularly potent brew of romance and violence. That's an interesting one there. I can think of Pick Up the Phone by Falling in Reverse. That's just abuse. That's all that was. That's all that song was about. While many emo songs are full of longing and daydreams for unrequited affection, their tales of intense pursuit are also sometimes accelerated into explicit aggression towards women, and when things don't go the narrator's way. Music proves that this isn't just a silver screen issue, right, Jake? You are love songs just as much to blame for our shitty view of romance?
I honestly think love songs got to be held just as like high as your shitty rom-com relationship, right? You know, and it's just because it's just like with anything else, it's usually an unrealistic view, you know, like, and even though like some people like, I just always love, one of my favorite jokes is every time Taylor Swift comes out with an album, I'm like, I wonder if this is the time Jessica breaks up with me so this album can really hit for her. You know what I mean? Like, and so like, you know, because there's just so many people out there that long for like, or that, you know, we relate to the music we listen to. We usually relate to the content that we take in and everything. And so the like emo is such a great like kind of example in a way, because there are a lot of songs about pursuing active, like hard, like aggressively pursuing, you know, like people and not necessarily like respecting boundaries. And emo was one of those too that like definitely, and even new kind of like the kind of like, I don't even know, emo rap kind of like, you know, Lil Xan style shit or whatever, right? Like that's been kind of like, you know, popping up in recent years. It's also like very like, if you don't love me, I will kill myself. Right. And it's just like, that's like, toxic. That is not like, you know, something that, you know, the kids should be jamming to, you know, like as far as like, and so it's, I think music has to be just as much to blame as anything else, if not even more in some aspects, because I just feel like people connect with music almost more than they do movies and television.
I mean, that's one thing I would say. Like, I feel like some people would argue against this and say, oh, it's just a song. Well, like, I feel like there's just a song has motivated me to feel a certain, like, even if it's something that, I may not be in the same situation or whatever the case may be, like music makes you relate to a certain vibe, and if that vibe can certainly entice you to do some shady shit. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. But here's the thing too, like the thing about it just being a song doesn't work here, because most of the artists that are making these songs, they also usually live that life. Right? Like, so it's not just a song. This came from a place of some kind of truth, whether it was internalized or something they actually did or had thought about doing. So, you know, that right there is an influence. And there's a reason why, you know, Gen Z has been thought of as being suffering from depression and anxiety, which is crazy because they're all so young. Like, you know, and part of it could be, you know, just, I guess, a microcosm of their generation being what they've grown into, right? Most of them were born during the 9/11 era, but, you know, shit, we grew up some of us grew up right after the tail end of Reaganomics.
Yeah, we're all depressed too, though.
Right, we're all exactly.
Like, we didn't get any better. So if they grew up with in the same time we did, no wonder they're fucking depressed too.
Yeah. So it's like, I think it does, like, I think there is real damage done by love songs when it comes to like how society views them, because like Jake said, sometimes some people either they self-manifest this because they either really love this artist or this type of music so much that they kind of want to embody the whole experience and they don't really know what they're asking for, or two, they are kind of self-sabotaging themselves because of what is constantly influencing their lives, right? Like, everyone listens to the music for the most part, and more so than you do probably watch music or television, because it's more digestible.
Right. I just think it's also, it's, you know, it's a slippery slope, because you don't want to ever sound like the people who think like Marilyn Manson makes people go do like shootings or something, right? Like, I don't think the music actually like makes
recently
you
came out as an abuser.
No, I mean,
what? Bad example.
Shocking.
Right.
Marilyn looks like an upstanding citizen. But like, you know, that's the big one, is that, you know, like, I don't think music, movies, television, anything like that makes us do anything, but I do think it can help normalize bad behavior. Right. Like, you know, especially some of the music that people like listen to, because it is, like you were saying, Kev, it's responsive, right? Like we listen to it, and you know, songs can make us cry just like a movie or, you know, a show can, or anything like that. They all can elicit, you know, kind of reactions. And so,
I mean, I think that's absolutely a fair point to make here with that. I think that music can give you a certain vibe, or at least make you resonate with something, but it's not gonna, you know, there's a fine line between that and like literally playing your Beatles music backwards is going to make you kill JFK.
Yeah, it's not going to make you storm a Capitol or anything like that.
Right. No, you got to go to QAnon for that shit.
Yeah, exactly. You got to get deep into it.
straight from the source, right? Younger generations like millennials and Zoomers have definitely had an effect on how media portrays love. We were talking about them earlier. Many of our parents even rose up, many of our parents and even us to an extent grew up watching movies in which women found it flattering when their purses showed up an uninvited
pursuers.
If pursuers showed up uninvited with a boombox outside of their window, or broke into their bedrooms to watch them sleep, or even confess their feelings via poster board while their love interest partner sat in the next room. But is that changing? Jake, do you feel the younger generations have changed what is acceptable and when it comes to on-screen romance and dating?
Yeah, no, I definitely think our generation and the Gen Z, and I mean, even some of our, I would say even some of our parents' generation to an extent had started, like you said, Baby It's Cold Outside got canceled a few years back. Right. And so it's one of those where John Legend and I think it was somebody else had to come together and do an updated version.
Kelly Clarkson.
Of Baby It's Cold Outside. And so it's obviously we're changing things. And
the fact you consent.
Yeah. And the fact that we look at basically stalker behavior of the 80s, because there's a lot of rom-coms from the 80s and stuff. Ask your mom's favorite movie is probably Pretty in Pink or something. That movie's toxic as fuck. And so there's or 16 Candles. There's a lot of movies where it's about predatory behavior, where this is a full grown man deep into his 20s looking at a girl who's essentially 15, and being hey, you're about to be 16 though, and wherever the fuck we're at, that means it's cool.
American Beauty.
Yeah, dude, American Beauty. Yeah. And there's just so many movies
aged so poorly.
Not just for Kevin Spacey either.
Not just for Kevin Spacey.
And so I think our generation, just but I don't think it's just our generation. I think every generation pushes the media and the stuff that they consume even further and further. And we should be progressing, right, as a society, always progressing. And I feel while we do have a lot of fucking work to do, if you really pull back the candles, if you're looking at stocks prices or anything like that, right, and you're looking at the full picture of here's where we were and here's where we are today, we have made progress. There has been progress that's been made. And so we can only hope that our generation and Gen Z included, and even the next one, whatever the fuck that is, I don't even know, continue to push things.
Go to Gen X.
Yeah, I know,
no,
right?
I'm kidding.
Yeah. But no, I hope we continue to push things, and we continue to see more representation of LGBT couples, more healthy couples, less toxic couples. And, even just continuing to teach people just what is good and bad about relationships. Right. And so
I agree.
I definitely feel our generation and every generation pushes, media into what should essentially be a more progressive, direction.
Yeah. I agree. Kev, do you feel that younger generations have pushed representation further, or is this just a natural evolution of entertainment itself?
No, I think that evolution definitely comes from the influence of the younger generations pushing for more representation, and I guess more healthy representation of what romance is in movies, right? Because I think, like Jake said, we are progressing, and that should be happening, and it is. We certainly have our work cut out for us, but we are moving in the right direction. But I think just, as you technology and social media definitely kind of bridge these gaps, right? Where you're able to sort of make different connections and see different people and have different experiences, or even be part of different communities. And then you sort of identify with those communities and you wonder why you don't see more of those communities being represented, or yourself even being represented. I think that's where that place is kind of coming from, and what's sort of driving that into what we see in today in media.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Jake, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we pretty much covered most of it. The younger generation's definitely pushing it, and I feel it does. I think there is a natural evolution that happens. How quickly though the progression happens, that's up to the people in each one of those generations. And I feel Gen Z and I feel millennials to an extent too, where you're kind of overseeing some of the tropes. You're tired of rapey shit being in all of our rom-coms, man. That's just one of the big things. But then I say that, And then also, fucking you is one of the most watched
Yeah.
shows. And who's watching
Yeah.
that? It's us.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but we
You
want to
know,
watch it to say it's
but-
bad. I hope.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we
And-
want to watch it to say, "Oh my gosh, that's so toxic. You shouldn't do that." You
Yeah,
know,
no,
I'm
right,
hoping
yeah.
that's the case. All
Yeah,
right.
just
It's
the-
like it's watching it. I think it's just the train wreck phenomenon, right? Like
Yeah,
I wasn't
can't look
watching
away.
because I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I'm like, God, this is fucking awful, but I can't look away.